Hello my beautiful friends, welcome back to our channel, and today's video, which is going to be a fun experiment that I want to offer you on noticing and regulating your own emotions and your thoughts about what you can control and can't control in your world. And I want to talk about the airport experience. So between the pandemic and the airports basically being shut down, zombie lands empty, and now post-pandemic where the airports are absolutely pumping, there's been such a big change in the airport experience. And it's been such an interesting experience for me as somebody who was working in the hospitals during COVID. So I was still flying a lot, sometimes almost on a plane all by myself during the pandemic, to now being in the airports again with lots of other people, with it being very seemingly chaotic and stressful. And even hearing people talk about how stressful the airports are and how you better arrive multiple hours early and how it's such a bad time in there and people are missing their flights and so on. So if you have been away from the airport for quite a while, you're just starting to kick into traveling a bit more and you're planning to go into the airports, I'd love for you to use this time as a bit of a thought experiment, a self-awareness experiment, to see how your thoughts, your responses to what you can control and what you can't control actually affect your outcomes. So traveling during the pandemic was a peculiar thing. Everything about the airport experience, getting from home to sitting myself on the plane, was very well controlled. There were very little variables that I had to account for there. There was no traffic in the city, so if I had an Uber from home to the airport, it would be very predictable. There was nobody in the airports. There were no lines that I had to account for. Even if something had to come out of my bag at security, it was a very quick turnaround. There were no crowds to slow you down as you're walking through the busy Melbourne airport. And when boarding opened, you just walk straight up and walk straight into the plane without pausing for a moment. You could even say when you got on the plane, I mean, the runways were never busy or congested or so on, so the plane would just take off on time. Revelation. So I got very comfortable with that. And then, as I noticed, when the city opened up again and the airport became bustling, I had to again mentally account for so many more variables. There were so many more things that are out of my control that I needed to do my best to account for, just in case, with my end goal of getting on the plane. So the first time that I went through this airport experience where I hadn't in advance accounted for all these different variables, all the extra traffic and the lines and so on, I just visualized it sort of subconsciously being the same as during the pandemic experience. The first time that I went through this airport experience that was more bustling, I found myself waiting in lines, kind of looking at my clock, being like, not that I wear a watch, looking at my phone and being like, this is a bit tight. And that would create this stress response, and that would start to change my body state and my behaviors and things. And because I've done this thought work in the past, I was able to recognize that happening in myself and remind myself of what is in my control and what is not in my control at that time. The interesting thing about the airport is that along that airport experience, from ordering your Uber all the way to getting on the plane, there are many things that are not in your control. Traffic, lines, etc., security, finding something that was unexpected in your bag, whatever. But there are many things that actually are in your control. And I think this makes a special mix of anxiety for people. And I see this happen both from afar, watching people at the airport, listening to people at the airport, and also with whoever I'm traveling with at the airport at the time. Because the advice to just sit back and relax and let it happen, and it is what it is, and don't stress when it doesn't matter, doesn't quite hold up. Because there are some things in your control that can change the outcome that you get. So we need to have this sweet balance of controlling what is in our control, recognizing what is in our control and maximizing our result from that. And also letting go in those times when you're stuck in line or some congestion, or you get pulled up and bomb tested or whatever, to allow that and let that go for our own sake, because there's no result to be gained from trying to control what we can't control. So this is a really good example of how I think our stress response is sort of meant to help us function and meant to improve our results, but also how it can quickly defunction and make us decompensate and not serve us at all in what we want. We want to use our stress response at time because it heightens our vigilance. It helps us stay attuned to the environment around us and also within us as to potential opportunities and threats. For example, you want to be vigilant when you arrive at the front of the security line. You want to be thinking well about what to pull out of your bag so that you don't have to do another loop, or whether these are the kinds of shoes that you need to take off, whether you're wearing a belt or not, or whatever. You want to be vigilant when you're sitting relaxing at the gate, when you could be lost in a book or distracted by something else, but the line is moving and boarding is closing. You want to be aware of what's happening there. But we want that response to be used sparingly, even when they're in this small experience at the airport. We want to turn that vigilance on intermittently, not for it to be on the whole time, because that level of vigilance can be quite draining on us. And it can quickly turn into hypervigilance, where you have this actual stress response that makes you hypervigilant, hyper attuned and focused on all the threats in the environment around you. And that thinking isn't always smart thinking. That hypervigilant thinking, as opposed to vigilant thinking, is not highly functional. It's over the top, it's excessive. Where I see people be hypervigilant or unnecessarily vigilant is, for example, at the time when we're waiting in lines. Everything is out of our control at this point. We actually have this visual ticking clock of how much time it's going to take. With the people in front of us, we can see how quickly they're moving. We can estimate in our minds how much time we have before we need to turn on our vigilance again. So what I want you to get curious with and start to be deliberate with is when you're in those moments where the next step, the next phase is out of your control, the phase that you're in right now is out of your control, to not turn on that vigilant, hypervigilant response, to not keep that running in your body, but instead use that time to relax back into the moment. When you're waiting in line, it could be the most pleasant experience of your day, of your week. This is a time where you have to do nothing. You could take this time to be completely present with yourself. But instead, what most people do is they stress, they anticipate, they think about that next vigilant step of being in the security line and whatever you have to do. But let's be honest, it's not a highly intellectual activity. It doesn't take much planning. Most people have done it before. You just take the things out of your bag. Further from that, what's the worst case scenario? Sure, you forget to take something out of your bag. Then you do a loop and it might take you an extra minute, an extra 5 minutes. That's the worst case scenario for if you're not appropriately vigilant or don't problem solve well at the time of getting to that next security step. Other times that are out of your control is when you're sitting in the Uber or whatever your transport is waiting to get to the airport. It's different if you're the driver, then you're the person who's in control at that step. But if you, like me, find long-term parking at the airport too expensive, then you might be getting an Uber as well. And that is actually so much free space, comfortable free space in a car gazing around the city where you could just enjoy yourself. But a lot of people will be trying to play out things in their head and stressing in their head, using up their energy while they're in this comfortable, warm, safe space, when there's nothing more that they could do at that point. And there's nothing more that they actually need to prepare for. Another time that's quite interesting is waiting at the gate. So we're just waiting now for boarding. We have been given a designated time for when boarding will open and when the plane will arrive. And that time is never going to be earlier than what was planned. It will only ever be later if something is delayed, right? So you know you've got at least until X time before you even need to think or be aware of boarding again. And I'd like to challenge you to try and use and enjoy that time. Turn off that vigilance. Certainly settle down any hypervigilance you have to try and use that space in your life. This is such an interesting experiment with looking at what you can control and looking at what you can't control, and being deliberate with delineating which is which, and then enjoying, allowing in the moments that there is nothing for you to control. And turning on an appropriate level of vigilance, not hypervigilance, but vigilance, when it's almost time for boarding to open, or when it's almost time the last person has boarded, for you to then turn on your vigilance and then execute. And all the way up until that moment that you've decided, you live your life in the present moment. This is such an interesting self-awareness experiment, and also way for you to see where you're having trouble letting go of what you can't control, and also appropriately taking responsibility and controlling what you can. Love you guys so much, and I'll see you in my next video.